Colonel William Light came to Rapid Bay on the 8th of September 1836. He arrived under the auspices of the South Australian Colonisation Commission, having spent nearly 3 weeks on Kangaroo Island. In his journal he wrote, "At 12:30 p.m. we came to anchor in 10 fathoms, a beautiful valley in view. At 2 I went ashore and was enchanted with the appearance of the whole. A fine stream of fresh water ran through the middle of the valley into the sea, and the soil was rich beyond expectation." Bungala House is situated on section 1171 at the eastern end of Yankalilla, and on the northern side of the river after which it is named. The name Bungala is thought to be an anglicised version of the Ghana word Bungala, meaning 2 lagoons, originally in reference to the lower reaches of the river. New South Australians were attracted to the rural areas with higher rainfall, cooler climates and abundant water, designing and building their own homes from local stone and timber. Originally, section 1171, Yankalilla, the site of Bungala House, had been granted to Christian Henry Pollock in 1853, who sold it on to Henry Morris in about 1854. Morris built a small 2-roomed stone cottage, which now forms the back of Bungala House. The Butterworth brothers, John and Eli, arrived in South Australia with their parents in March 1840, aboard the Baboo from Liverpool in the UK.
Yes, well, both brothers sort of came to the area. Eli sort of started with the mill. John Butterworth was down at Normanville, and he took a property next to where they had a grain store. They built a grain store there, because they were shipping their wheat out, and then that was very close to the wharf in those days. So they built a grain store there, which was next door to the what became the Butterworth Beach House. So both the Butterworth brothers, John and Eli, were partners in the business and the properties that they had. So they shared that, and they even later got their own ship to transport their wheat. So that's how keen they were, because everything, it was much easier to sail it around up the Gulf than go over the rough bush tracks to Adelaide.
Eli and his wife Sarah Butterworth and their children moved to the cottage on section 1171 in Yankalilla in 1866, and Eli extended Bungala House, the current middle section, into a 4-roomed building. It is thought that Thomas Skinner and his son William ran a blacksmith shop and forge at the back of Bungala House property. After Eli Butterworth's death in May 1886, John became the owner of section 1171, which still comprised 80 acres. In October 1886, the property was sold to Harry Robert Graham of London, who bought Bungala House for the use of his brother, Frederick Malcolm Mal Graham.
And then, of course, when the Grahams had it, it became even more grander with a wing either side. And of course, money wasn't an object to him. And that was sort of the start of the social set. Because they even used to come from Adelaide in horse and buggies to there. Imagine, a whole day trip almost to get there, And it became a real, real social area, and centre for the whole town, but and functions, I suppose, from the town itself. Of course, during the war, when the Red Cross used to hold their fundraisers there, and it would have been lovely being a fly on the wall in those days, the way they had plenty of servants to do everything, and the ladies would turn up there in their finery, and here we are in the middle of nowhere almost, it was really, would have been very interesting to peek out and see what was going on. Yeah, well, Fred Graham was, he had health problems, but he's obviously had a very sharp mind, and he was an innovator, and he decided that he made this contraption like a buggy, and he put a sail on it, and he thought, if I can propel it along, and he just tried it in the paddock and seemed to be doing all right. He had, could steer it. And then he told them one day, he said, well, open the gate and I'll go out on the main road. So he opened the gate, off he goes, the wind took the sails, and away he went. He couldn't stop it. He turned the corner into the main south road, and some horses that were tied up there near Clayton's shop got frightened and crashed into the glass windows of the shop. He gets sailing down, and he didn't stop till he got to the Normanville sand dunes. So he decided that that wasn't a real success. So then he ended up getting one of the earliest motor vehicles. But he couldn't drive himself, so one of his men used to drive him around in it. And so, yes, he was quite a character.
After Fred Graham's death, Marion Graham moved to England, and the house was mortgaged to Henry and Frank Rymill. Fred Graham's cousin, Frank Westall Rymill, and his wife Anna occupied the home for a number of years. Over the next 50 years, the grand Bungala House was home to a multitude of people. In 1923, it was sold to Agnes Sophie Emma Lesky, married woman. Her son later reminisced, Dad converted the home into a guest house, and I remember well standing on the running board of cars to direct guests. I used to get a lot of nice tips for going around filling the radiators of guests' cars. Attractions were white rabbits, multicoloured guinea pigs, a pet opossum, fallow deer, and bird life. There were myriad short-tailed parakeets in the large pear tree, silver eyes in the mulberry trees, blue wrens in the bamboo thickets, and various coloured parrots, not forgetting the lovely Gullian finches, which nested freely in the gardens, a real paradise. In 1925, Edward Hurtle Mayfield, Marion Graham's cousin, purchased the property and continued to run it as Bungala Guest Home. In 1942, he was still the registered owner. In 1946, the property was sold to Reuben and Bessie James, and it continued to operate as a guest house. It was still in their names in 1958, serving as accommodation for long-term workers in the area. Sadly, before Murray Lyons and Barbara Trelaw purchased Bungala House in the 1960s, it had been vandalised. They saved the building as best they could and rented out rooms and facilities to school teachers, but little was done in terms of upgrading the main house. A once great property had now fallen into a sorry state of disrepair. In December 1979, Adelaide artists Mark and Jill Pearce moved into Bungala House with their 3 children, having seen the place while on holiday in Normanville. By this time the house was quite neglected and needed a great deal of repair and restoration.
From the first, Jill loved the space, declaring it the largest house she'd ever been in, although Mark claimed some of the southeast houses in which his mother had partied were much grander. While the real estate blurb made it sound like a mansion with huge grounds, in reality the neglected house required an enormous amount of work and rebuilding. Verandas needed reinstating, half the roof and several ceilings wanted replacing. Stone walls had to be repointed. They were interesting people who had been formally trained in art, spent 3 years at the National Gallery of Victoria, and then travelled a lot in Europe and in the UK. They lived for a time in Rome. They slept on the beach for some months when they were living on Skyros Island in Greece. And they endured a few hard, harsh winters in London. Jill had made magic with a very small budget. She had a wonderful eye for colour and design. She had some very beautiful objects which she displayed. And as she said, they didn't have money for a lot of fancy furniture, so she painted the walls marvellous colours. When I was starting the Leafy Sea Dragon Festival, the forerunner of Festival Flurio, Jill and Mark were behind me, well and truly. We had a fabulous exhibition of local art there, and a lot of art brought in from other artists that they knew, and it established their name as a very important hub for showing art. Well, there are a lot of things still in the district as legacies of Mark. His easels and painting materials and brushes and so forth have been dispersed to working artists. In our garden we've got lots of pottery of Mark's and a painting of Jules. And if you look in the district, there are bird baths and pottery things all around, and wider in gardens in Adelaide and much wider still. These two would never show off or grab the limelight, so that's why it's important to tell their story. Mark was out in public much more than Jewel. He made a living out of being a potter and a painter, but she had to subdue her artistic instincts, and she's a jolly good painter. She had to look after the family and look after the family finances. There wasn't much money, and she had to buy and sell real estate and look to the business side as well as bringing up the children.
By the time Bungala House was sold again in 2014, it had been the Pearce family home for nearly 35 years. In August 2014, Gary Brown and his partner Jo Little, who would later become Mrs. Brown, purchased Bungala House's 14-room residence on 4.4 acres of garden. The Browns were serial renovators, adventurous people up for the challenge of renovating the old homestead. The Browns used professionals for the plumbing and damp courseworks, but undertook most of the other renovation tasks themselves. The garden also had a serious makeover, including the removal of many stone pines. In June 2017, an application was presented to the South Australian Heritage Council nominating Bungala House for state heritage listing, but the application was unsuccessful. The Browns ran Bungala House as a high-end bed and breakfast venue, which was awarded third place in the Advertiser's Top 50 South Australian Homes. In 2020, it was again up for sale, but it was not until 2021, because of the COVID-19 pandemic, that new owners David and Ari Jolly fell in love with the beautiful Bungala House.
So when we moved here, part of the dream was to actually slow down, relax and unwind and get back in touch with nature and let our boys grow up with that simple lifestyle that we had when we grew up. So the first thing I did when I got here was get a push bike so that I could ride it up to the bakery every day and pick up my fresh bread and ride home. And you know, it really juxtaposes that chaos that we used to live. Yeah, so I guess the thing is that we want to make Bungala House a place that's really comfortable for people to come in, relax and unwind. You know, they need to feel like they've left the chaos of the world behind once they come through the front door. The house itself, we can accommodate up to 10 people. We've got 5 king rooms. Sometimes we'll just have a couple come in. Sometimes there might be 3 or 4 travellers together. Other times we have large groups who come in and hire the whole house, and whether that's just to get away with friends, whether it's, you know, an escape over Christmas or New Year. Sometimes it's wedding groups or hens groups that come through and just want to have a bit of an escape together.
It takes me somewhere between 3.5 to 4 hours to mow the lawn. I've just cleaned out one garden area and 2 8x5 caged trailers of the nasturtiums from the winter time and springtime to be removed. Everything here is on a giant scale. That's the bit that's really blowing me away. And everything I try and do is multiplied. It's either got 3 zeros attached at the end of it on a price, or it's got weeks added to it on duration. And that combination of those two things is how I have to sort of work it out. And we started looking around. I started looking at the Barossa. I started looking at places. I wanted a farm-ish sort of place. And then Ari was looking on the internet and she found Bungala House and she went, oh my God, if I'm moving to South Australia, this is the sort of place that I could live in. And so I said, fine. So that was on a Tuesday. And then we rang up the real estate agent and we flew over here on Saturday. And we walked around the place. The boys started climbing the Moreton Bay figs out the front. And we walked through the house and we went, oh my God. And we knew that there was people looking at the house as well. And we sat out the front and said, what do you want to do? So after 2.5 hours, we'd fallen in love with the romantic notion of this gorgeous old home on 5 acres, which was big enough, with the Moreton Bay figs out the front, which we just adored, and we went, we have to buy it.
I think it's taken a bit of time to adjust. I think when we first moved here, trying to slow down was really challenging. You know, I was looking at the speed limit of 50 and going, how do people only drive at 50 kilometres an hour here? It was such a contrast from the fast-paced life that we were living. But equally so, we came into an environment where people just welcomed us with open arms.
So the future for us, at least from my perspective, is that it becomes the place that people want to come to celebrate. Talking about having art shows in the gardens, having music events in the backyard, having barbecues out where people can come and have a family event. And it's a family home. Through its entire history, it needs to be a family home, not just for us, but for us to share.
I think it's just nice to recreate an environment where it can continue to tell stories. I think, when we saw the sharing shed, we knew that had to be a spot that people could celebrate and enjoy. You know, I saw live music concerts, I saw paint and sip classes, I saw people just being able to immerse themselves in a different way, but use the space to create their own needs. And I think that's really what I want all of our changes to reflect, that you know, it's had a rich history. It was such an integral part of society in the early days. It was, you know, the first place to have a telephone. It was hosting the Red Cross luncheons during the war. You know, it seems that it's only natural that it finds its own way to move with the times and still be celebrated locally and, you know, and by the wider community as well.